Hello, everybody. I'll let that statement sink in for a second. So on the last panel, somebody said that governments don't really do anything right. Um, they try, but honestly, they don't have to, right? Governments are monopolies. And that's exactly why we need censorship-resistant stablecoins. Crypto has brought competition to industries that have seldom seen any. And stablecoins have taken on the biggest monopoly of all, governments. Because aside from bartering, governments have always controlled the way that we transact, and they continue to do so, especially in our geographical area. And crypto has changed some of that, but it is too volatile to actually be used on everyday, day-to-day transactions. So stablecoins don't solve that. And yes, crypto has a very long way to mature, but it is much worse. It is not that much worse than our current system. Our current system is also still maturing. It is not as sophisticated as governments will have us believe, and some of their mistakes continue to have repercussions. But who sues them? If the government makes a mistake, they just say, too bad, we'll try better next time. And if we make a mistake as an emerging industry, or not, even if we don't make one, the SEC can still come knocking. So let's look at some of the mistakes that the US government at least, has made over the last several years. That have actually contributed to large gaps in economic inequality in the US. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, they created the Homeowners Loan Corp that was tasked with providing low-cost mortgages to basically help the economy. And so they went on and created a survey and surveyed a bunch of bankers, and these bankers, based on their risk assessment, they created these red line districts. These districts, or these areas, these neighborhoods, were mostly non-white neighborhoods that were deemed as too risky. And so the majority of the actual funds for this equity building vehicle went to predominantly white neighborhoods. That was in the 1930s. The same red line districts today continue to be low income to medium income neighborhoods and continue to be predominantly ethnic. So a badly implemented policy continues to have an effect up until now. Something else that to me came as a shock is that women in the US were not allowed to take business loans without a male cosigner up until 1988. That's my lifetime. It was 36 years ago. That, to me, it's unreasonable, to be honest. But they tell us that we live in a very sophisticated society with sophisticated financial systems, and yet 50% of the population was pretty much excluded from being part of it. And that's women, right? Until 1988. So over the years, the US has actually banned several things, including several things and the only reason that these things have become legal have been because basically the government has not been able to shift people's behavior, like weed and alcohol, right? Eventually those are becoming legal in the US. Napster, however, has never become legal, but it did bring in a lot of much needed competition into the music industry. So now we have Spotify, Pandora, iTunes, we have options. So competition benefits the consumer and benefits constituents like us. So we need to continue to push the boundaries. And as you build your protocols, there are going to be several things that you're going to have to deal with, right, to actually create something that is censorship resistant. So how much control you want over your protocol, what dependencies you use, and how you deal or address externalities. So for control, obviously you have to decide, are you going to have a multi-sig behind your protocol, a governance? And is your protocol going to be immutable or upgradable? And how will these upgrades or happen? You're going to use a multi-sig, a vote, governance go vote, or even build in some thresholds that are triggered by some liquidity withdrawals. For dependencies, especially for stablecoins, it comes down to your price discovery mechanism or the oracle that you actually use. Obviously, no matter which way you go there, you're going to have to deal with liquidity, but we'll talk about it in a second. For externalities, lobbying or consumer sentiment as well as political climate are two things that you're going to have to deal with no matter what. We deal with it all the time. And there's not a lot that you can do aside from marketing and lobbying. It can be very expensive, but luckily we have some of the crypto giants that are taking up those fights right now. And for dependencies, going back to the oracle, when you're trying to figure out what to use, sometimes it just comes down to trade-offs and what do you actually want to do with your protocol. If you want to focus on speed, sometimes you're like, okay, well, I need to give up decentralization. But honestly, there have been some pretty good implementations out there that have been able to take advantage of speed and also be censorship resistant. These are the three primary structures that I have seen people implementing oracles properly. So the first one, that allows you to have speed if you use a more centralized oracle that is faster, but then you use a fallback oracle that is more censorship resistant and decentralized. And then you have another type of structure where you might use multiple oracles or get data from them and then aggregate them on chain. Now, no matter which structure you use, the most important thing that you're going to have to deal with is going to be your data definition. So how do you actually do your off-chain data aggregation? Because as we've seen through the years, the biggest or the most common way to attack a system is not to actually attack the oracle directly, but actually attack or manipulate the price or the asset that you're using. Last year itself, it was like, I think it was like 12 hacks that were literally all done through flash loans to actually manipulate the price of the asset. So no matter what structure you decide to go with, you should always have system fallbacks. You should always assume that something's going to go wrong no matter what. So you not only have some fallbacks built into how you do that aggregation and how you make it a lot more expensive for people to manipulate the price of the asset, but also how do you handle when everything is broken? Because ultimately, if you get hacked, who cares how it happened? If you're the CEO or the CTO, it's your fault. You're going to have to deal with those repercussions no matter what. And with everything, we have to deal with liquidity. When you're choosing the assets that you're backing anything with, you have to make sure that you have all of these things in place. Otherwise, you're basically becoming a target. And that is all the time I have. But I just want to, to close this, I just want to remind everybody that crypto is a social movement. We focus a lot on financial items or financial instruments, but ultimately what it brings to the table is the freedom of choice, like Michael said earlier, but it goes hand in hand with censorship resistance. So as you build your protocols, if you cannot make them useful for the people that actually need them in areas where they're absolutely necessary, in the US it's nice to have these stable coins, these yield-bearing instruments, but in places like Argentina, like Venezuela, they're absolutely necessary, and they cannot exist without censorship resistance. So anyway, thank you for listening, and I am way out of time, but thank you so much for the patience, Barbina.